Welcome to my channel Techie Ved. I am Ved. Let's get into the video today. So today we'll be talking about different models in software development lifecycle. This is a video following the basics of software development lifecycle. I'll pin the video for the earlier video on the first of the description. And then let's have a quick recap in what we have discussed in the last video, and then we will jump onto the video for today. So in the last video, we've spoken about what is SDLC, what are all the different approaches to SDLC, and what are all the different phases. And each phase, what are the inputs and what are the outputs. So with all the phases that we know, so how are those phases differently manipulated in a way, and how are models derived is what we'll speak today. So let's see what are all the different kinds of models, and what let's also touch upon what basically a software model is and what is the purpose of it. So SDLC model is basically chosen on the basis of the need for each of the project. So for example, your project is a short-term project where you need the project to run for a duration of 3 to 5 months or even larger, and you are basically developing a piece of software that is needed. So you will choose basically based on the need. And the purpose of using any of the software development lifecycle models, the SDLC models, is basically to derive the best quality out of whatever work has been done. And remember this, that adhering to a specific model that you have identified will always help in systematically developing the product in a disciplined manner, and this would actually be a very good help for your client. From a customer standpoint, it is always helpful to have in such a way. Some of the models that we'll talk today are the waterfall model, V-shaped model, prototype, spiral, and agile. So I'm not saying that these are the models that are there and there are no other models. So these are the basic of the models from different areas, and this would be something that we can have as a start. Let's quickly go on to the waterfall model. So waterfall model is, as you can see, it's a clear sequential model. And this being a sequential model, when I say each of the phases, the first phase is completed, then we go on to the next phase and all. And the end of each phase there is a stage gate, so that to ensure that whatever all the outputs that are required from that are being completed. And once this is completed, we go on to the next stage and all. Okay. With this being a sequential model, let's also look at what are the advantages and disadvantages. This is sequential, which basically means you go to the next stage only after you complete the first phase. So it is very easy to understand. And deliverables are defined upfront, where you see that what are the outputs of each of the phases. We have looked at it in the last video. So you clearly know what is expected out of each of the phase. Okay. And this becomes easier to manage. As I've mentioned, the stage gate approach would basically mean that you have a checkpoint at the end of every other phase, which basically ensures that these are met. Only then you go to the next phases. Okay. And this would be beneficial when the requirements are basically clear at the beginning of the process, which basically allows you to go through all the steps. Coming to the disadvantages, this cannot really cater much to changing requirements, because say for example you are in testing phase, and the client comes up with a new requirement. What happens? You'll have to basically go back from the requirements analysis. You'll have to understand the new requirements set that comes into the picture, and try to embed this into already designed infrastructure that you have, and then you will have to go for the implementation. This basically means that there is higher cost involved, and it is again time consuming, because you have to go through the entire process. So that's waterfall model. Let's look at the next model, the V-shaped model. So coming to the V-shaped model, this is somewhat closer to waterfall model, but additional steps brought into picture. So it is called V-shaped because there are two V's here, the verification phase and the validation phase, as you can see from the picture. So this is again a sequential model, where you go from requirements, system design, high level design, low level design, coding, unit testing and all. However, you will have direct correlation also, where the acceptance test, the system test, integration test, and unit testing are also looked at parallelly. So you will have your validation of the requirements done even before the coding comes into the picture. You are only validating here, you're not these are just validations that all of what is all all the requirements are covered. Say for example, in the requirements phase, you have your requirements identified, and what does your requirement say? They speak about the functionality that is expected, the system requirements that are spoken about is all comes into the picture here, right? So immediately following requirements analysis, while system design is happening, there is a validation that is done from an acceptance standpoint. The customer would look at what are the requirements that are captured, and if there are requirements that are not captured, they can immediately go back and maybe go to the requirements analysis phase and correct that out. Okay, so again, this being a semi-sequential model, like this can be said as a non-sequential model, but at the same time, it is semi-sequential as well. So this basically is easier to understand again, because you know what is expected, what is going to come after the next phases from a development standpoint, and you know what is the validation that is going to happen. This is again having a clearer, we need a clearer set of requirements at the beginning, and then it can be improved out. And the disadvantages for this are basically it'll become tougher to implement because you need multiple teams working at the same time. So for example, if your thought is to onboard people like testing only when you go to the testing levels, this might not be might be inefficient, because you would need to have all the team available for that product at all times. Okay, and changing requirements actually can cause quite a bit of havoc, because say for example, you are in low level design and during unit testing you identify that the requirement set is not done, so you'll have to go back to the original phase, then go through the process again. Okay, so that's V-shaped model. Okay, let's look at the next model, that is the prototype model. So prototype model is basically another non-sequential iterative run model, which basically brings in the concept of prototyping. So as you know, the definition of prototype is basically it's not the end product itself. You are basically creating a mock-up for the product so that the customer understands what is coming out of it. Okay, this has an iterative run. So let me show you what happens here. So during the requirements gathering, you'll have all the requirements and you'll do a quick design. Based on the design, you'll create a prototype. Say for example, you are building a web page, you might actually give them a Figma. You use the tool like a Figma to show out, like, this is how it will look like. This is the look and feel. And you can even create a wireframe so that the user can understand, like on click of something what happens. So you might not actually put in the logic behind, but you can basically create a wireframe for this. And then this prototype is basically evaluated by the customer, and based on the customer feedback, you'll refine the prototype. The refined prototype again goes through design, and this cycle is done as many number of times as required until the customer is satisfied that this product is good, and the final refined product will basically become their final product. Okay, so because of this, what the biggest advantage is, you are seeking you are seeking the customer feedback at the initial stages of the initial prototype itself, and then which basically improves your customer satisfaction levels. And then there is low cost that is incurred because of the to incorporate changes, because you're only doing the prototype, you're not actually building the product itself. Okay, and coming to the disadvantages, sometimes because the customers have the understanding that they can refine, they might not define the scope initially, and the number of iterations you have to do may increase. So this will overall project's perspective, it might actually impact your commercials and all. Okay, and yeah, like I said, tough to understand the overall cost, because the customer requirements are changing, and system architecture is to be defined and finalized, which enables the overall understanding of the product, and this becomes tougher in prototype model. Because for example, say initially your requirement is for 100 users to use your web application at any given point of time, and later they say, okay, now make it 500, now make it 1000. The initial infrastructure that you have done has to go through multiple revisions, and sometimes it can be a cause of concern. Okay, so that's about prototype model. Let's quickly look at the spiral model, the next model. So spiral model, as the name suggests, is basically every process that runs in a spiral way, so like a circular way. So here the requirements concepts come into the picture, the verification and validation concepts come into picture, and this is also a prototyping model again. So during this, the difference between this and the earlier prototyping model is that you will basically be determining the determining the objectives, identifying the risks, and you'll try to resolve them. You'll go through development and plan the iteration. So you'll basically doing this in an iterative way, and where all the things come into picture. Because of this, the cumulative cost actually is going to be reducing. It moves towards the progress. Basically, you start at the center, start building the product higher, 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 another level of prototype coming into the picture and stuff like that here. Okay, so again, the advantage is iterative prototyping. We've spoken about prototyping earlier. This, it's not too different from the prototyping model, but again, this is run in iterations where you are also identifying risks and all. That's the major difference here. Okay, and spiral model is basically suited for a long term projects, because say for example your application, you have a defined set of requirements, and at the same time you will also be evolving your requirements at this point of time. Say for example, initially you started a website to cater to one specific business area, and you are going to make it available for other business areas in a longer run. You have a product purview for a long time perspective, then you go for the spiral models. Okay, and absolutely this is not suitable for short term projects. That's one of the biggest disadvantage, because setting up this entire prototyping model. So if it's so this is a prototyping model, right? If it is a short term kind of a thing, go for rapid prototyping model than spiral model. That's what I'd suggest. And again, tough to identify the overall cost, again because the requirements are changing and you'll not have the full picture. Okay, let's look at the last model for today, that is the agile model. Okay, the agile model is basically again an iterative model. So here what happens is, there are certain concepts that are brought into picture, like iteration or sprint, and you'll have a planning that is done. You'll have your development, and you'll have your testing and demonstration of whatever you have development, and then going for deployment. And deployment is basically optional here. So this is done every as an iteration. Say for example, your kickoff is there, you'll do one iteration where you will do planning, development, testing, and demonstration, and then a deployment, optional deployment, and then you go on to the next iteration where you again do the planning for whatever the sprint or the iteration that you are doing, a 2 week or a 4 week period. So again, this would basically go on and run, and you'll go to n number of iterations. So we will have detailed discussion about the agile model in the upcoming videos, but let's speak about the advantages here. So advantages perspective, agile is basically iterative model, allows the customer feedback at the end of each iteration, because you are demonstrating whatever you are developing, and the customer can basically give you the understanding about, okay, I want this to be changed and all that. Okay, and the cost to incorporate any changes is very low, because say for example at the end of first iteration, the customer identifies and says that, okay, this is what I am expecting, a change to be done. You can basically bring in the changes in the next iteration. Okay, and this is basically suited for both long term and short term projects. It is not suitable for one kind of project, like we discussed earlier. Okay, coming to the disadvantages, so this would need highly skilled people, because you are expected to do all different kinds of all different things that are needed from development and testing inside the timelines. There isn't much time to just take time for understanding what is required and then going into the next next set of actions. You need highly skilled people to complete this. Okay, and so there will be initial adjustment, that mindset adjustment that individuals would need. So this is always a little tricky from the perspective of our developers. Okay, if and then there is another huge disadvantages. If the client basically is unaware of agility the practices, they can basically be in panic, because initial stages they'll only may they only may see a framework that is coming into a picture, and next, suddenly something else happens. It might be panic for them, because they might not see the whole product at once. Okay, so we'll have to the role of the scrum masters and other roles that comes into the picture would basically be playing the role of keeping the client calm. Okay, so this is the agile model. So we have spoken about 5 different models. Okay, and I think this is a positive place to stop. Thank you for your time watching the video today, and we will meet again in the next video. Thank you so much.